within Laravel, it's okay, you have all of your options, but no one says we're going to use a different ORM in Laravel. You just use what's built into Laravel, and you have different options for, you could authenticate a different way, but the out of the box authentication, even without the actual front end pages, is just kind of there, and you accept it. Even smaller things like, yes, you don't have to use Tailwind CSS, but the majority of people who are starting a Laravel application probably are using Tailwind CSS, just kind of like accepted.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Frontend FM. My name is Maxi and my guest today is the JavaScript to Laravel guy and Laravel DevRel, Josh Cirre. Josh, how are you?
I'm doing great, Maxi. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's funny because I feel like a lot of my Laravel journey, which I know we'll get into, kind of started with a stream that I did with you, and now it's kind of bookending right now.
That's right. You were my first guest on my stream. It was a couple of years ago. Yeah. We talk about Laravel as well. And now, we'll come full circle. We're still talking about Laravel, and I'm very excited because unlike last time, I've actually started using Laravel now. So I have more questions for you now about it.
Yeah, I'm ready for it. I'm always excited about that.
Awesome. But before we start, I wanted to ask about you. Can you give us the origin story of Josh, how you got into tech, and what are the things that led you to working at Laravel?
Yeah. So I, like most people, probably was always excited about tech. It was one of those things I just didn't know where in tech I was going to kind of end up. Even in, junior high and high school, I kind of did some HTML and CSS. I was like, okay, I can be a hacker and create this cool website kind of thing. And I knew nothing. It was just mostly it was modifying some inline CSS style variables at the time. But it felt cool to be able to do something like that. And I kind of went through the phases of, okay, maybe I'll go into, computer science. That didn't really work out. That was a little bit too much math for me. When I picked up a book on C++ to try to, and this was in 8th grade, I picked up a book in C++ to try to figure out how to do game programming. And I got about maybe halfway through the first chapter. And then I was like, this is a little bit too much. So I was always still interested, but it was one of those things that I just kind of kept doing on the side, kept learning of okay, mostly around gaming at the time of okay, there's a lot of PHP BB bulletin forums that I could design. And it was mostly just tweaking variables in design, tweaking themes in WordPress. It was a lot of graphic design too. For the longest time, I thought I was going to be a designer. Long story short, I went to college for nothing like tech. I went to college for communications, and a lot of that was I had goals and aspirations to be on SNL. So the stand-up improv comedy. I did a lot of musical theater type stuff, very acting, I guess, focused. And shortly after college, trying to figure that out or trying to go along that path, I realized that's a lot of work, and very few have that payoff. I was like, okay, I still want to be able to have an actual income until I get there, or if it ever happens. So I eventually just switched back into tech. I guess I switched back into what I already knew. And a lot of that was just kind of helping with websites. So I think my first job in tech during college was kind of called this content specialist job. And it was basically just entering things into a CMS. Very, very, very technical stuff. But over the course of time, I eventually, on nights and weekends, just taught myself how to code piece by piece. I never really worked as full-time as a developer. I always had jobs that were kind of adjacent to development. So customer support engineering, where I could oh, hey, I think here's this bug. Here's the proposed fix that I think is probably the reason why, and be able to kind of scratch my itch on how to learn in that way. And then I eventually moved into something called solutions or sales engineering. It's kind of I like to think of it as DevRel if there was no DevRel for that company. So a lot of it's kind of making sure other companies who are looking to buy your product or your software, that they know how to use the advanced features of that software. And so eventually I just kind of found my niche in tech of, I think, one, just kind of trying to make as much content as possible, and then two, just trying to learn as much as possible too. I think the roles that I had been placed in or selected kind of helped guide that to now where I am today.
Very cool. Very cool. So, yeah, I think when you started playing with these technologies back at school, it's very similar to my own experience. That's how I got started too. Looking at, I think it was C or C++, like you said. This is too complicated, but then I got into like PHP and some light JavaScript. Just looking into like, I was managing or administrating some forums for the communities, local communities, and we wanted to customize it, so we had to dive into the code. I had no idea what I was doing, but I remember at the time the way that you installed a plugin was to just modify the code directly. So there was a tutorial that told you, which files you have to edit, and you would just copy paste those things without knowing what you were doing. And that's how, so I got started too. So,
That's interesting, because that's really similar to like my backstory. But funny is I didn't actually start programming. I modified a lot of themes in like WordPress or like PHP BB, but I never really touched the PHP part like that.
Oh, okay.
I never even started learning. I think the first thing I started learning, other than I knew enough of syntax in C+ to know how to do Hello World, that was about it. But the first thing I started programming in high school was Visual Basic, VB6.
Nice.
And it was to modify plugins in Photoshop so that it was a hacked version of Photoshop. I'm sorry, Adobe, but I couldn't afford it at the time.
So you got into, when you started building more robust websites, did you start with like the JavaScript stack, Next.js and all of that? Or how did you make that transition first?
Yeah. A lot of what I learned usually came out of came out of the impetus of what I wanted to finally build. And I think from my background of like, okay, I'm not a great designer, but that was kind of like my background of what I like to do. Of like, it was just kind of like graphic designer. I liked making things look nice on the page, and so I think I naturally veered towards the front end aspect of programming within JavaScript. And so it was a lot of, I'm not going to touch the back end until I have to. So it was very much, I started off just learning, basic vanilla JavaScript, and very quickly picked up React as a templating language. I think Create React App was still like the main thing at the time. And so I didn't really pick up Vite until a little bit later. But then most of my side projects or like client projects were then done in either Next.js, a lot of Gatsby stuff, because I was doing a lot of like Jamstack. That was like the thing. I was like, oh, I'm going to make myself known for Jamstack. But then I realized I didn't really like GraphQL. So that was a little bit tricky for that. And then Next.js felt, and I eventually quickly learned where I actually needed to start having a database. So most of the stuff I was doing was very static stuff. I was calling an API and getting that information. And each piece that I learned was kind of just out of this need for finding a solution to whatever my current problem was, whether that was like my own thing of like, oh, I want to build this particular kind of app that I can save X amount of information for, or it was like a client project of like, okay, now they need to edit information or they need to upload information. Now I have to figure out a way to do all of that. And so, I think mostly Next.js, some Svelte and SvelteKit, and then slowly transitioned into Firebase and Supabase as my final JavaScript ecosystem world.
Right. And then you made what led you to Laravel? Did you face any challenges with the JavaScript stack, or was something about Laravel that interested you?
Yeah, I think it was kind of a little bit of both, because I'm always one of those that like the way I learn is just trying out something new. And so I would dedicate time at night, and this was kind of like my way of wanting to better myself, because like I still didn't know if I wanted to be like a full-time developer, or if I wanted to like stay in sales engineering, or eventually like move into DevRel, which was like the thing that I eventually wanted to move into just as like a pipeline goal. And it was kind of one of those things where I tried to force myself at night of like, okay, here's a new tool I learned, or a new package that I learned, or a new, even like a framework or language that I saw, and I want to try to I want to see like what makes it valuable. And so every night, I would say, okay, like here's Nuxt, and here's how I would do this with Nuxt, or like here's solid JS and solid start, and here's how I would do that with solid start. And so like I at least wanted a 20% understanding of each framework and skill. And I eventually got to this point where the part that always took the most time when doing actual projects, when I'm like, okay, I want to build this tool that people log in and then they save stuff to a database, like typical what you would need for most 90% of projects would be like authentication, a database, and some way to query it. And I didn't really have too much opinions on what I liked in the JavaScript world around that. Like a lot of people are like, oh, I really like Drizzle or Prisma, or maybe they have like an older school stack with like Mern, and they like, Mongo and Mongoose or something like that. But me, I was like, I kind of like being told of like, here's how to do it, just go and do it. And I think there was some things that I eventually like got from that world, like with like next auth, like it's nice to have those pieces, but it was still take me time of like, here's like an hour I'm dedicating to just get it to a starting point. And most of my apps were so diverse that I didn't want to create a starter kit of my own thing. And so it was one of those things where I just continued to keep looking at, okay, what am I missing from other stuff? And there was one night I remember where I can't remember. I think it was Chris Sevs, who is now the director of DevRel, my boss. funny timeline there, but he wrote a Notion post and put it on Twitter about 3 years ago. He wrote why he's moving his SaaS app from Next.js to Laravel. In the Laravel world for a long time, kind of moved everything and kind of was in the JavaScript world, and then slowly moved back. And it was a lot of the points that he was making about just a lot of things coming out of the box and not having to find a first party or a third party solution or service for it kind of really resonated with me, especially since I was doing more client side work and wanting to kind of build my own SaaS stuff and and just learn more of that on the side. And so I was like, okay, tonight I'm going to learn Laravel, Rails, and Elixir Phoenix. And so I built my like baseline app that I try to build whenever I'm learning something new. I still do to this day is I haven't actually like put it out anywhere, but I effectively call it bookmarklet. It's basically like a to-do list, but with bookmarks.
Okay.
And the reason why is if you kind of learn every single piece of most of how you would build with an application, even within like the JavaScript framework. I still do this to try to learn, like solid, or I just did it with this with a tan stack, for example. And it's basically an authenticated to-do list. So those bookmarks that you save are saved to your specific profile. So then you learn authorization and policies. And then the bookmarks themselves are URLs. So then I have to learn validation of how am I going to client side and server side validate this. And then also kind of like a step goal is like any kind of like scraping. So like I would scrape like the metadata from that URL and embed that into the database too. And so I built that app with Rails, Phoenix. I've built it with almost every framework, but that night I built it with Rails, Phoenix, and Laravel. And there was just something about the starting point at Laravel, the authentication that I got out of the box. Basically, even though I didn't know it, it took me about half the time it took me with the other two stacks. And I was like, this is really cool. I don't know PHP, but it also felt the most familiar to me within JavaScript than something like Ruby. Ruby really looked weird to me. A lot of people are like, oh, Ruby's really readable. To me, PHP seems a lot more readable. And yeah, I think from there, I kind of told myself, I kind of like put my foot down of like, okay, any other project, I'm not going to try to play around and figure something else out. Any other project, at least for like the next 6 months, I'm just going to find where are the limits and where are the like disadvantages of using Laravel. And so I built my first SaaS with it. I didn't know Vue really well. I knew enough, but I didn't know it really well. But I built it with Vue. I built my second SaaS with it, and I built it with Livewire. And then that was about probably just under 3 years ago, and now that's pretty crazy, or maybe just over 2 years ago, not too long.
Yeah. Very, very cool. Very cool. I think that's something that for a lot of people, including myself, that aspect of Laravel of being this batteries included framework where a lot of the decisions have already been made for you. It's something that is very appealing, and it sounds like the solution to a lot of the problems that we're facing on the JavaScript community. Why do you think isn't, I know there are some solutions, just some JavaScript based solutions for this batteries included approach, but why do you think none of them have reached mass adoption? Why do you think the build it yourself approach is still more popular?
Yeah, I think the reason why they haven't reached that mass adoption is because, one, probably because of just tenure. Like it's tough to build something like that overnight and just have it be widely adopted, in the sense that Laravel has been around for 10 plus years. And even though I only discovered it 3 years ago, I mean, I had known about it, but I hadn't started playing around and seen how awesome it was until 3 years ago. I think there's the benefit of that, and then there's also the benefit of kind of a single voice. And I think this is where it's really unique with, so Taylor Otwell, the creator of Laravel, he basically reviews every single pull request into every single repo of the whole Laravel every single morning. So basically nothing gets merged without him kind of clicking off. And there are some people who like he has trusted for specific packages of like, okay, you take it, I'll just give you the yes or no kind of thing. But I think that helps a lot, and it's tough to have that kind of benevolent dictator in a different kind of framework, because it's tough to have that kind of personality that, one, wants to do it, but then two, like that's what they're able to do, in the sense that like they have the ability, technical ability to do it, but then also maybe like the time to do it as well. So I think that also lends into why Laravel's has seen success. And then thirdly, I think it's just, I think in the JavaScript world, having specific opinions is very much, and not lock in, but having specific kind of, this is what, being told what to do in the JavaScript world is very much not as accepted. And I think within Laravel, it's okay, you have all of your options, but no one says we're going to use a different ORM in Laravel. You just use what's built into Laravel, and you have different options for, you could authenticate a different way, but the out of the box authentication, even without the actual front end pages, is just kind of there, and you accept it. Even smaller things like, yes, you don't have to use Tailwind CSS, but the majority of people who are starting a Laravel application probably are using Tailwind CSS, just kind of like accepted. And I think within the JavaScript world, yeah, there are those, hey, we're just trying to take Laravel tools and apply them to JavaScript. And I don't think that works, because it's not JavaScript based. Like, it's not what JavaScript developers are looking for. I think the closest thing, and probably the best bet for what is going to be Laravel in the JavaScript world, is going to be Next.js. And I think they're slowly moving towards it of okay, how do you give the ability to use auth, and if they have a very opinionated, here's how you query the database, whether that's just using server actions or whether it's using an ORM. I think the more you kind of look into the docs and you see, oh, this is the one way to do it, the more that kind of thing happens in the JavaScript world. Right. I don't know if that's ever going to happen, but I think that's the reason why you don't see it, is because you don't look at something, you don't have an opinionated framework that says, okay, this is the one way you do this. You can figure something else out, but this is the one way to do it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. Also, there's a bit of different frameworks. Not only they have different, like they use different design patterns and different solutions, but there's also this feeling of people not wanting to be locked into a particular solution. Maybe because framework X uses that, and the framework they use is against the framework X philosophy, right? I don't want to call out any particular frameworks, but it's something that if someone uses that pattern, then no, we want to do this differently. And I agree with you that probably Next.js being so popular, so widely adopted already, has probably the better chances of incorporating this. I'm happy to see that they are bringing more and more stuff into the framework itself, because it just doesn't make sense to reinvent the wheel every time you want to do auth or something like that. Yeah. Definitely.
I also think two other ones that could be like contenders that have less tenure, but probably more of like the other aspects of like having benevolent dictators and having more opinions, would be TanStack, mostly just because it's He already has created almost like every single aspect of a full stack framework. It's just kind of pushing it together. And so like, there's already queries and everything like that built into it. And while it's like still in beta, I think like that could be something that we could see become more of that, where it's like, oh, you have everything you need. You don't have to reach out of the tan stack to do it. And then next would be like Astro, which I think is really interesting. I know you love Astro, but I think one, it has kind of like the benevolent dictator of like, okay, there are key people who kind of dictate how Astro grows. But then two, there's also the aspect that even TanStack doesn't have, or even Next.js doesn't have. Vercel would be the equivalent, where you have kind of like in Laravel, you have these flexibility of options while still having opinions. And I think that's where Astro kind of shines. Okay, Astro doesn't really care if you use Vue or Svelte or Solid or Angular or what. I think Angular can be used now, but they do have opinions of here's how to connect it to a database, for example.
Yes.
And I think that's huge.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Astro, it makes it really easy to do these integrations, to integrate whatever framework you want to use, React, Vue, you want to install Tailwind, you want to do authentication in a given way. And even though the framework itself, when you create a new project, doesn't come with all those things, it makes it really easy to adopt them. A lot of times you just run a command and it does the thing like in a second. So you don't have to worry about manually installing this library thing. So yeah, definitely agree with that. I know that, so Laravel comes with a lot of power built in, but I know that you can also add to it. You can hook it up with additional libraries, additional frameworks or tools. What is your personal like Laravel stack? What else do you, when you start a new project, what else do you bring in addition to like vanilla Laravel?
Yeah. My personal Laravel stack, and this kind of like talks to like some of the really, really recent updates that we just launched within Laravel, is we changed how our starter happens within Laravel. So in the past, there was kind of like a couple different options, and within those couple different options, there was even more options of having, how do you start? Do you want just basic authentication, or do you want more of like a SaaS starter type thing? And just recently, in the end of February, we kind of launched these starter kits, which is basically extremely simple authentication, still everything that you might have within the old version of Laravel, and probably more than you might have in like a out-of-the-box JavaScript thing, where you have login, log out pages, forget password, all of that's hooked up, and using like more modern stylistic changes. So like things like shadcn or shadcn viewport. And there's just three options. There's React, there's Vue, and then there's Livewire. And so my personal favorite right now is Livewire. And so for those who are kind of unfamiliar with the Laravel ecosystem, Livewire would essentially be HTMX, but specific to Laravel. And it feels kind of like it's blended into Laravel because it's only used for Laravel. There's no other ports of Livewire for Laravel. And it's a way to write basically like the communication protocol between your front end and your server without having to write any API calls or AJAX requests. It kind of does that for you. So imagine you had a button on the client, and with that button, whenever you clicked it, you wanted to run some PHP server code. And so it basically gives you the option to basically run that server code or have the protocol to be able to run that server code from that button, and kind of vice versa as well. So that is my current preferred stack. Realistically, for when I'm starting out a project, I don't add too much to, if you want to call that vanilla Laravel, what is a Laravel official starter kit. There's some things that I like personally in the Laravel ecosystem. So within Livewire, there's basically two ways to write it. There's a single file component way of writing Livewire, basically kind of really similar to like a Vue or Svelte, where you have your server code, and even like a React server components type style, where you have your server code up on top, and then you have your template code at the bottom. Or you can write that kind of like in separate files within Livewire. And so I prefer the single file component. And then for most projects, I prefer, Laravel has a way of doing file-based routing as well. So if you have like a pages folder, It could be like pages/blog, and then it just works, like all the routing and model binding and everything works with that. And I prefer that. Some people don't, because it can get messy once you get into bigger applications, and you want like text-based routing and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been playing with those starter kits.
Awesome.
Last week, I installed my first one. I've been using the React one because that's the one that that's the framework I'm more familiar with. And I really appreciate the fact that you changed the names of the starter kits, because I think before you had one called, was it Basil or something?
Breeze and Jetstream. Yeah.
Breeze and Jetstream. And it wasn't like, I think one of the first questions that the CLI asked you was, which one do you want?
And you're like, I don't know what that is.
Yeah, I don't know what it means. But now it's very clear, like React, Vue, or Livewire. So it's very clear. And and I think that's probably the React starter kit or the Vue starter kit. I think for people coming from the JavaScript community is a very nice starting point, because it doesn't expose you to the entirety of all of the things that are new in Laravel, because you can buy into like all the way to do the backend stuff first, and how the controllers and the models work and the migrations work and all of that, but still use React for the front end. But of course, Livewire looks very interesting, but it's another thing that I have to learn. Just bring in everything, like everything is going to be new if I start using Livewire. But I'm very interested in Livewire. And one of the questions that I have for you is that, so there are a lot of different flavors of doing the UI layer, I guess, in Laravel application. You have Livewire, like you mentioned. There is something, I know there's Inertia.js, which is not necessarily Laravel specific, but it's very popular in Laravel world. And there are things like Vault. I don't know what Vault is. I don't know if that's a Livewire thing. So can you give us a walkthrough of all these different ways of doing UIs in Laravel apps?
Yeah, exactly. And so the starter kits themselves kind of have all of these options just kind of obfuscated for you. Kind of like you said, like the goal was to make it less choices that you had to choose from. And so now you just have React, Vue, or Livewire. And so React and Vue are powered by the Inertia stack. So Inertia is basically, and now it's a first party package from Laravel. It was created by Jonathan Renning, who is on the Tailwind Labs team now, and was still maintained with him, and had a Laravel official package, but then kind of like a community-driven third-party packages for Rails, as well as Phoenix. And there's probably some other ones as well, like Adonis.js. But the Laravel team officially kind of took that over, brought it into the fold just recently, like in the last couple months. And so it's run by the Laravel team, still with Jonathan kind of giving his thoughts for it. And so it's officially the way to have that connection layer from the front end to the server. And so that's really what it is. It's instead of having to write API calls in React or Vue like you would with a traditional like SPA app, and then you're having to, authenticate those API calls and call them back. It's a layer to basically say, okay, instead of having to do all that, now in my Laravel code, I'm just saying, okay, I want to grab all of this user's to-dos, and I'm going to push them to the front end. And then in your React or Vue component, you just basically receive all of that as props, and can then, you even get special form magic helpers to be able to post to different routes and stuff like that. So it's very much like the glue behind the server and the front end side. Which allows you to do things like React, Vue, and even Svelte. Even though we don't have an official Svelte starter kit, there are some community-driven ones that you can use pretty easily within the Laravel new command as well. And then the Livewire is basically, it's still technically a third-party implementation, but from someone who is very active in the community and is the preferred way of writing non-React or Vue code within Laravel. And so Livewire was created by Caleb Porzio, who's the creator of Alpine.js as well. And it's basically, kind of like the Volt is the single file page. And so it's basically the ability to write Livewire in one file, where traditional or class-based Livewire would be a kind of separate file. So you would have your PHP class and then your Blade template, which is Laravel's templating language. And then it does get tricky, because even within Livewire, you have options. I think that's kind of like the premise of Laravel. You have specific things that you can use, but you also have a ton of options too that could confuse people if you knew about them. But you have the ability even in Livewire, to write more functional style instead of in those single file components. You have the ability to write functional style rather than class-based style, and that kind of just looks like having maybe more familiar with JavaScript developers, or even just a shorter syntax for quick things instead of having to write a full class that you're exposing a public function. Now you just get it all in one line.
What's your preferred way of working with Livewire?
Yeah, my preferred way of working with Livewire would be the Volt, so the single file component, mostly just because I like seeing, hey, here's my button, and then I know exactly that's the function that I'm calling right up here, just a couple lines up. Nice. And I like the class-based style. I even in JavaScript, I preferred class-based JavaScript. A lot of people think that's weird, but I like it being verbose, and that's one other thing why I like Svelte, because a lot of like Svelte developers really like class-based type stuff right now. But yeah, that's my preferred. I like the class-based single file component within Livewire Volt.
Nice. And can you combine, like, can you mix and match these patterns, or is it something that you have to sort of buy into, like config, and then you have to use the same flavor all the time?
Yeah, I don't think that you definitely can. You definitely don't have to combine, or you don't have to keep it separate. So there's ways to combine. I think it's not very popular. Like there's not many people who are doing it. Mostly because Inertia technically serves up a single page application for you, and then kind of pushes those props for you. So a lot of people maybe they are doing kind of like server rendered Livewire for the marketing side of page, but then in the same Laravel app, you're routing to a Inertia application from there. So like that's probably the most common way of doing it. Within an application, you're probably doing less of like the switching, but there's even some great community packages for that too. There's some community packages where you can serve up React or Vue components within a Livewire component, for example.
So there's a path to migrate from one flavor to another, like incrementally. Once I go, I'm gonna migrate this route to Livewire.
Yeah, I think there is. Probably not like an official first party, but there definitely is ways, and people who have done it in that way. But it's probably more the other side around of like people start with a server driven, not even any Livewire. So you can technically write Laravel without, that Livewire. You could just write it as a classic server side. We're posting to a route and we're going. You could do that. And most people kind of incrementally adopt either Inertia or Livewire from there.
Makes sense. So you told me about the starter kits, but I know that Laravel recently had like a big week where you launched a bunch of new things, including Laravel Cloud. Can you tell me more about Cloud?
Yeah, Laravel Cloud is crazy, because even before I joined the Laravel team, as a JavaScript developer and as one who wasn't like, I never was, hey, I'm going to spin up a VPC and host my Node application on this. Like that wasn't how I learned. I feel like I skipped that phase, or I was just a little bit too like new for that phase. And so I was very much serverless. So like Gatsby hosted on Netlify, and like there's serverless functions that you could call within Firebase, and or like Next.js functions eventually. Like I forget when they released those, but it was some time ago. It feels like yesterday, but it was they've been around for a little bit. And so I didn't know anything outside of serverless, and like to my detriment, I didn't know how to easily host applications outside of serverless too, because they make it so easy. You hook up your GitHub account, you say I want this repo, and it's pretty much set for you. You might have to tweak a few settings, and you're good to go. And so when I got to Laravel, it was interesting because I didn't really know how to host my app. I tried. Laravel has a couple of options even before Laravel Cloud came out, called Laravel Forge and Laravel Vapor. Laravel Forge basically gives you the ability to say, okay, I want to connect my DigitalOcean or Hetzner server, and then it kind of sets it up for you, and you're good to go. And even that, like, I get it, like it was easy to do, but like I was like, it's got to be simpler than this. So I eventually used Laravel Vapor instead, which was basically the way to host it on AWS. And so it kind of does all of that setup and stuff for you, which felt more my way. But Laravel Cloud basically came out of that need of, is there a way to host Laravel and get a project that you just push to GitHub up somewhere running within less than a minute? That was kind of Taylor Otwell's like grand vision when he kind of brought it to the team, and was one of the biggest impetuses for taking on funding, which Laravel had been completely bootstrapped up until early last year. And the fundraise was mostly just to be able to kind of achieve that goal of Laravel Cloud. And so it's basically everything I would have wanted personally if I wasn't even on the Laravel team, because you log in, you connect your GitHub account, and you select your Laravel application in your GitHub repos. And then you're basically given this page of saying, okay, now do you want, a database attached to this? Do you want a cache attached to this? Do you want a bucket attached to this? I could get, of course, like an existing application probably takes a little bit longer, but like a new starter kit that I'm pushing to my GitHub repo probably takes around like less than a minute from installing it on my local device to pushing it to GitHub and deploying it. So it's really crazy. It's all managed by Laravel. So that's like the biggest key difference is it's not on your servers. It's not on your, AWS instance. It's completely managed by Laravel. And it's just kind of all things that you don't have to think about in the end of the day.
It looks, I've seen a few demos and it looks amazing. I'm definitely going to give it a try for this project that I'm working on. I'm excited.
Yeah, the team did a great job, and like it's cool for them to mostly, and like myself to be able to brag about it for them, but like it's cool how they built it too, because I think it's a testament to, okay, the one of the reasons why I think Laravel works great is like people are building in Laravel on the Laravel team every single day, and so there were so many additions to the framework, to existing products and applications, and even just like, to the things like the starter kits, because of how they've built out things like Cloud. So like Cloud is built with Laravel Inertia 2, which was something that had released at the last year's Laracon US, and React. So like the benefits of all of those things are kind of clearly seen from the Laravel team, and so it's easier to pass down to the community.
Right. Yeah, and there's also a testament of how fast you can build with Laravel, because if I remember correctly, when I first heard about Cloud, Taylor mentioned that the team built it in 6 months. They had like a working version, which already looked fully functional. I'll say, how on earth can people build this in 6 months?
Yeah, the crazy part is we had to not record demo, like a kind of like insider piece here. We had to like not record videos of it because it was changing so frequently. Like, because the team there was right before Laracon EU, which was when they were kind of announced the launch date, early February of this year. So they were going to announce the launch date later that month, but they had a hackathon, so everyone. Most of the Cloud team was there, and within like 48 hours or like some crazy amount of time, 2 or 3 days, like the whole front end had changed drastically. So like it looked completely different, and I hadn't even seen it. I like woke up over the weekend and I was like, oh yeah, this is a completely different application. So it's just crazy how much, and I think like it's really cool to see such a small but growing team like being able to push out code like quickly like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So switching gears a little bit to, I know you're preparing a talk for Epic Web Dev this month. Next week, is that?
Yeah, next week. It's pretty crazy. Yeah, I'll be flying out probably like in 7 days exactly, kind of thing. Next week around this time.
And I know that I'm interested by the title of your talk, which is LDD, or Learning Driven Development, which, if I remember correctly, you had a podcast with that name. Is that right?
I did, yeah. I had a podcast with that name. Being able to, the whole goal was being able to take written articles. I did one of yours, I think, as the first one of the first, I think first or second episodes, and basically just so much good stuff that I like talking through what I've just read, and I was like, I might as well like make a podcast of it if I have to talk through it with someone.
So tell me more about the LDD philosophy. How do you describe it?
Yeah, very similar to like how we kind of started off this conversation, in the sense of like how did my background start, and a lot of it was I always had felt in like what most people feel in that like tutorial hell type thing of like where you just feel like you're never actually learning something. Like I probably pulled open the same like React tutorial maybe 20, 30 times, and it just never clicked with me. Like I would be watching it and listening to it, and I just, if I was to sit in front of a blank code editor, I'm like, I don't know where to start. Like, how do I write a function? Like, it's just super simple stuff. And the philosophy behind learning driven development that I've seen over the years is, one, you have to learn how you learn specifically. And that's different for everyone. I can't tell you, okay, this is how you should do this. But like for me, I learned quickly that the way I learn best is by watching someone else do something and then figuring out how to do it myself without sometimes even without like documentation, without, I just like, I want to struggle to find an answer to something, because I already kind of know, I've seen it done for me. Now I just want to do it for myself. And so the philosophy behind learning driven development and the baseline for this lightning talk that I'll be giving at Epic WebConf is what does it look like instead of trying to say, I want to learn React, or I want to learn Laravel, or I want to learn Svelte. Instead being like, I want to learn how to do this. And then it's so easy to bring everything else along the way. Like for me, it's the bookmark it kind of application. And I have learned so much like other frameworks just because like I have this problem that I know here's how I would solve it with X, Y, or Z, but it makes it easy to kind of apply any other new thing that I'm learning. And so I usually tell people, a lot of people, especially now that I've kind of been able to like put out more videos and stuff like that, a lot of people usually are like, okay, like what's the first, project that I should do? Or like, what's the first thing I should build? And usually like, I never give an answer because I don't think there's a clear answer, but two, it's not going to be something that you're applying to it. And so usually the thing that I want to convey is, in order to learn as you develop, in order to have this kind of, I'm being a better developer and I'm learning along the way, it has to start with a problem that you are, one, passionate about and you're going to come back to, and then two is something that you can already apply in some ways of your current skills. So maybe that's a project that that you happen to come up against at work, and you're like, I do this task, takes 20 minutes. I'm going to figure out how to do it in a different way, maybe like with something new that I'm learning. Or maybe it's a project that your wife like it comes up to you and be like, hey, I don't know how to do this. And you're like, okay, I'm going to make an app in 6 hours and and then you can do it. But I think even in our first live stream that I did with you, that was like the app that I had kind of built that I wanted to teach you. It was kind of like I wanted to send my wife a note every morning and be able to say, okay, hey, I want to write it out and then schedule it to be sent every morning. And so it was a way for me to, teach me all these aspects of Laravel that I didn't know too well, but it was also a way for me to like, hey, this is something that I know I have a problem with. So how am I going to learn those additional steps of how does a scheduler work? How does a cron job work? And having those additional pieces, I think, is what really drives learning.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And I think it's much more important now in the age of AI solving or sometimes skipping over these learning steps completely. I'm finding this myself as I'm trying to learn Laravel, that is so easy and so tempting to say, hey, I want to do this. Can you do this? And the AI will comply, will do something, but I will learn nothing from it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point.
Okay, this works, but I didn't learn the underlying concept. So the next time I have to do this again, even if you have an AI available, maybe implement it in a way that is not the most efficient one, or it doesn't work in certain edge cases or whatever it is. But by skipping that step of not learning the underlying product behind, or the classes that Laravel use, or whatever it is that you're learning, you're not doing yourself a favor. So I love this idea of like a project driven learning technique and how then you can reuse those learnings in different problems, I guess.
Yeah, the AI piece is a huge one that I want to make sure I touch on. I only have 5 minutes for the talk, but I wrote some notes that I wanted to make sure that I talked on it, because it is one of those things where I think, I personally use a lot of AI. I think it's a great tool and I work a lot faster with it. But if I'm learning something, it's very tough to do it. So usually, like, my practical, I guess, advice for a lot of people, and what I'll try to convey during the talk is like, if you're ever learning something, like using AI less as like your vibe coder and more of like your rubber ducky is like super helpful for me. Where like I'll just like open up like a Claude page and be when I was learning like the tan stack, I was like, here's all this documentation. Like I would like copy and paste it in. I was like, what does it actually mean? Like I was having a hard time wrapping my brain around this specific concept, but being able to like talk that through and like try to understand. And I think it's really also helpful within AI if you're doing here's how I would do this within Next.js. How would I do this within Laravel? Because I think combining those two worlds usually is like the perfect place for learning. Because then you know, okay, here's what I would normally do, and here's the mindset I have to kind of like wrap my head around now.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, I think it's definitely useful when you ask it questions. Like I was asking it, what's the best way to do this in Laravel? Yeah. And it created a service, and it's like, oh, I learned the concept of services and how they're useful, and that helped me understand things. But yeah, it's the understanding portion is the one that it's tricky and it's easy to skip over, but it's very, very important.
Yeah, exactly.
Josh, before I let you go, I like to do picks for the audience, like anything you want to share with the audience. This could be books, movies, TV shows, anything you want to share. Do you have any picks?
Yeah, I have one pick, and this was probably like a year too late, but it's fresh on my mind. So like last week I was coming back from, or last weekend I was at Laracon, India. So this is a long flight for me, and the Wi-Fi wasn't working very well, so I didn't do anything except like watch whatever they had on like movies and TV shows on the thing. And I didn't have HBO Max. Like that's not a subscription I pay for. So I had never watched The Penguin, an HBO show. So like set in like the DC universe. Colin Farrell is the Penguin as an actor. I never watched it. I heard good things about it, but I never watched it. I just didn't buy it or didn't have the time to stream it or whatever.
Yeah.
But I binged the whole season on the 2 flights, one to India and one back from India, and it was so good. Like I almost like want to watch it again. Like it was so good. So like that's my pick. If you by some chance haven't, and I know I'm a year late to this, it was this. I think it came out like a year ago.
Yeah.
And you like kind of like the superhero DC universe type feel. It's very much not like a superhero show. It's more of like a crime mafia type show.
Okay.
Really interesting and just so good acting and casting. So
Nice. I will check it out. Yeah, I haven't watched it yet, and I do have a Max subscription, at least for the next few months.
There you go.
Yeah, so I'm definitely going to watch it. Because I forgot that it was there. I remember when it came out, I didn't have the subscription and say, oh, this looks interesting. And now I do. So yeah, thank you for reminding me.
Yeah, of course. It was so good.
Awesome. My pick is a book. I have a book this week. This is a book that a lot of people on my Twitter feed are reading. This is AI Engineering by Chip Howie. She wrote a fantastic book on everything that you need to know to work with AI. This is perfect for people who have been, like myself, sort of out of the loop for the last couple of years, not really keeping up with all the things that be happening. And this is like a perfect way. It's a long book. It's a pretty long book, but it's a great introduction. It dives deep into how the models work. If you want to do some sort of like prompt engineering or anything like that, it has great tips. So I'm really enjoying these books and I highly recommend it.
Awesome. I'll have to pick it up.
Yeah. All right. Josh, thank you so much again for joining me in the podcast. Where can people find you?
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me, Maxi. I really appreciate it. You can find me online, mostly on Twitter and YouTube is probably like the best place to find me. And that's Josh Cirre, JoshCirre. Or if you go to cir.re, that is where like kind of my list of links are as well. I am on Blue Sky and LinkedIn. I don't post on that as much. So like if you use Twitter/X or are keen to follow me on YouTube, you can find me there.
Awesome. We'll leave links to all of the places. And by the way, you have the coolest domain name. It's like it's five characters total.
Characters. Yeah, I got really lucky on that. Like I had to go through this website called Gandhi.net. So it was a lot sketchier. They did a redesign and it doesn't look as sketchy. So I think I'm safe. But I've had the domain now for probably like 2.5, 3 years. And it's so nice for like quick links. So like if you go to cir.re/YT or /X, like that's my Twitter/X
Very cool.
profile. So it's cool.
So cool. So cool. All right, Josh, it was a pleasure to have you here. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks again, Maxi. It was a pleasure.